All right, Esther chapter 5, let's call this one a recipe for relief, 2 feasts, because in this chapter, Esther is going to get the courage on the 3rd day, presumably the 3rd day of the fast that she had just asked Mordecai to proclaim, to go to the king. And she is going to go to the king, who is going to extend her his royal scepter, which is going to suggest mercy. She does not have to die for entering the king's inner court without having been summoned. In addition, the king is going to say, "What is it, Queen Esther? Up to half of the kingdom is yours." But no matter how much mercy she is getting at this point, she is still treading lightly. And so she simply asks the king to bring Haman to a feast that she has prepared for them this day. That's the first feast. Because when they get there and they get to the drinking portion of the festivities, he is going to ask her again, "What is your request?" And she is going to again tread lightly and simply ask the king and Haman to attend a feast she's preparing for the next day. At which point, Haman's going to be overjoyed, but as happy as he is, he's going to run into Mordecai, who, in spite of all the threats that Haman has manufactured against the lives of the Jews, Mordecai is still not going to bow or tremble before him, showing himself to me to be a man of courage, in addition to the integrity he's shown to this point. And so Haman is going to run home and call together his support group, which is going to include his wife and some friends. And before them, he is going to tell his sob story of how he has great riches and all these promotions and how everybody has to bow to him. And even Queen Esther only allowed him to go to the feast with the king. And she's going to do the same thing tomorrow when he gets to go back and party again. But it all means nothing as long as he sees Mordecai at the gate, the man who won't bow. And so at the end of this chapter, his friends are going to give him what seems to be some pretty sketchy advice, but they don't seem to be all that different from Haman, because they're going to say, "Well, that's simple enough. Build some gallows, and tomorrow have the king hang Mordecai on those gallows before you all head off joyfully to the feast," which is going to please Haman, who is going to have those gallows built as chapter 5 closes out. And the reason that 2 feasts stood out to me was Haman's reaction as he is pouring out his sorrows to his friends, that even Esther invited only me to accompany the king to the feast. And in the same way that Esther did not presume too much on her level of influence, Haman's tendency to presume too much on his is what is going to actually open the door for his downfall. Not understanding that Esther was not on the same page as he was reminded me of how dangerous it can be to become desensitized to the pain of the people, especially in a position of leadership. See, Haman has risen super high, but likewise, so has Esther. Esther hasn't lost touch with the pain of the people, primarily because she is among the people caught up in Haman's scheme. Haman, however, seems to have begun presuming that the only people bothered by the things he's been doing don't matter, which is another version of something we've talked about in previous lessons called a prison of our own fiction. See, Haman seems to be locked in a prison of his own fiction because he has gotten so used to seeing people bow before him that he has lost touch with an understanding of whether or not they actually care for him. And Queen Esther is not going to be the only one, because in later chapters, when she actually springs the trap on him, it's going to become apparent that even at least one of the king's eunuchs is happy to suggest a way that the king can get rid of Haman. And one of the reasons why it's so dangerous to lose touch with the pain of the people is, once again, as we saw in the last chapter, influence has limits. And in much the same way that Esther is going to help save the nation of Israel by respecting the limits of her own influence, not going straight into the king and being like, "Haman's wicked," but instead she prepares one feast and then another feast before she opens up about what really concerns her. Haman, on the other hand, moves forward full speed without full appreciation of the limits of his own influence. And so the next few chapters are going to give us another chance to look at the ways in which freedom unchecked can often be self-destructive. This time, helping us see the ways in which Haman did not fully appreciate the limits on his own influence.